Seaside Serenade. Win Valentine. First edition, published by I2I Hype, LLC 2024. Copyright C 2024 by Win Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or localities is entirely coincidental. Win Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers in the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Book cover by Dana Sacco. Fashion versus Finance. The Bellsleigh Harbor Town Hall bustled with activity as residents filed in, their voices a low murmur of speculation and concern. The usually cheerful space felt charged with an undercurrent of tension, evident in furrowed brows and tight-lipped frowns. Sage Winslow burst through the doors, her vintage floral dress a swirl of color against the sea of muted tones. She weaved through the crowd with determined grace, her recycled paper notebook clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. Mayor Elowen Bright stood at the podium, her trademark enthusiasm dialed up to 11 as she beamed at the gathering. Her vibrant red blazer seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, a beacon of cheer in the apprehensive room. "All right, folks," she called out, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Let's get this show on the road. We've got a very special guest with us today." The crowd settled into their seats, a rustle of anticipation rippling through the room. Elowen's eyes twinkled as she gestured dramatically towards a tall, polished figure standing off to the side. "Please give a warm Bellsleigh Harbor welcome to Mr. Derek Hartley." Derek stepped forward, his crisp charcoal suit a stark contrast to the casual attire of the locals. He moved with the easy confidence of someone used to commanding attention, flashing a megawatt smile that had several of the older ladies in the front row tittering behind their hands. "Thank you, Mayor Bright," he said, his voice smooth as butter. "It's a pleasure to be here in your lovely town." As Derek began his presentation, a sleek digital display illuminating behind him, Sage sank into a seat near the back. She uncapped her pen, poised to take notes, her expression a mix of skepticism and barely contained frustration. The scratch of her pen against paper punctuated the silence as Derek spoke, his words painting a picture of a transformed Bellsleigh Harbor. "Imagine," Derek said, gesturing to a rendering of a modernized waterfront, a bustling promenade lined with chic boutiques and gourmet restaurants, a state-of-the-art marina that will attract yachting enthusiasts from up and down the coast. And here, he pointed to a gleaming structure that towered over the familiar silhouette of the town, a luxury resort that will put Bellsleigh Harbor on the map as a premier vacation destination. A low whistle of appreciation came from somewhere in the crowd, but Sage's pen only scratched more furiously against her notebook. Her jaw clenched as Derek continued, extolling the virtues of increased tourism and economic growth. The numbers he rattled off, projected revenue, job creation, property value increases, seemed to have many in the audience nodding along. As Derek's presentation concluded, Mayor Bright stepped forward, her smile slightly strained as she sensed the mixed reactions in the room. "Thank you, Mr. Hartley, for that enlightening presentation. Now, let's open the floor for questions. I'm sure we all have plenty." Sage's hand shot up so quickly she nearly dropped her pen. Elowen hesitated for just a moment before nodding in her direction. "Yes, Sage? Go ahead." Sage stood, her cheeks flushed with a mix of anger and nerves. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Mr. Hartley," she began, her voice quavering slightly before finding its strength. "Your plan sounds very impressive, but I have to ask, what about the soul of Bellsleigh Harbor? Our town isn't just a collection of quaint buildings waiting to be modernized. It's a community with history, with traditions that have been passed down for generations." Derek's smile never faltered as he turned to face Sage. "Ms. Winslow, is it? I assure you, preserving the character of Bellsleigh Harbor is a top priority. Our plan isn't about erasing history, but about building upon it. Think of it as evolution, not revolution." Sage's grip tightened on her notebook. "Evolution? That's a funny way to describe bulldozing local businesses to make way for chain stores and overpriced condos. How many of our residents will be priced out of their own town by your evolution?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Derek's polished demeanor cracked just slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before he smoothed it away. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Winslow, but change is inevitable. We're offering Bellsleigh Harbor a chance to control that change, to shape its own future. Would you rather the town stagnate, watching as young people leave for better opportunities elsewhere?" "Oh, spare me the false dichotomy," Sage shot back, her voice rising. "There are ways to grow and adapt without selling our soul to the highest bidder. But I suppose that doesn't fit into your cookie-cutter development model, does it?" The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, some cheering Sage on while others defended Derek's vision. Mayor Bright stepped forward, waving her hands in a futile attempt to restore order. Now, let's all take a deep breath," she called out, her usual matchmaking enthusiasm replaced by a note of desperation. "I'm sure if we just listen to each other, we can find some common ground." But Sage and Derek were locked in a heated back and forth, their voices rising above the din. "You can't just waltz in here and decide you know what's best for our town," Sage argued, her cheeks flushed with passion. "Bellsleigh Harbor isn't a blank canvas for your grand designs. It's our home." Derek's practiced charm was slipping, revealing a hint of genuine frustration. "And what would you have us do, Ms. Winslow? Pretend the world isn't changing around us? Your nostalgia won't pay the bills or create jobs for the next generation." "Oh, so now you're an expert on our local economy? Tell me, Mr. Hartley, how many summer days have you spent at our farmers market? How many winter nights have you joined us for the Frost Festival? Do you even know the name of the family that's run the hardware store for the past 60 years? Derek opened his mouth to retort, but Mayor Bright finally managed to wedge herself between them, her voice rising above the fray. "All right, that's quite enough. I think we all need to take a step back and cool down. This meeting is adjourned for now. We'll reconvene once everyone's had a chance to review the proposal in detail." As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with heated discussions, Sage and Derek stood their ground, glaring at each other from across the room. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of anger, frustration, and something else, a spark of challenge that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Mayor Bright looked between them, her matchmaker's intuition kicking into overdrive despite the circumstances. She suppressed a smile, sensing that this clash of wills might lead to something far more interesting than either Sage or Derek could imagine. The town hall emptied slowly, a buzz of conflicting opinions filling the air as residents spilled out onto the street. Sage Winslow pushed through the crowd, her cheeks still flushed with anger, her notebook clutched tightly to her chest. She brushed past Derek Hartley without so much as a glance, though she could feel his eyes following her retreating form. Mayor Elowen Bright watched the scene unfold, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a furrowed brow and pursed lips. She glanced between Sage's retreating figure and Derek, who stood rooted to the spot, his polished facade slightly cracked. The mayor's mind whirred with possibilities, torn between concern for her town and an inexplicable excitement at the spark of tension she'd witnessed. As Sage strode down Main Street, the cool ocean breeze tousled her hair, carrying with it the familiar scent of salt and seaweed. Usually this would calm her, but today it only served as a reminder of what was at stake. She paused in front of Gull's Nest Bakery, its cheerful blue awning and window display of artisanal breads a stark contrast to the sleek renderings Derek had presented. Sage's gaze swept along the street, taking in the weathered charm of the buildings that had stood for generations. The hardware store with its creaky wooden floors, the second-hand bookshop with towers of novels in the windows, the ice cream parlor where she'd had her first summer job. In her mind's eye, she saw them replaced by gleaming glass storefronts and trendy cafes, and her heart clenched painfully. The jingle of the bell above Seaside Chic's door was a welcome sound as Sage stepped into her sanctuary. The familiar scent of lavender enveloped her, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She moved behind the counter, leaning heavily against it and closing her eyes. The quiet of the shop was broken only by the soft ticking of the driftwood clock on the wall and the distant cry of seagulls. A soft meow caught her attention, and Sage opened her eyes to see Jasper emerging from behind a rack of vintage sundresses. His green eyes were fixed on her, tail swishing slowly as if he could sense her distress. He patted over, rubbing against her legs with a purr that seemed to say, "I'm here for you." "Oh, Jasper," Sage sighed, scooping the cat into her arms. She buried her face in his soft fur, inhaling the comforting scent of home. With Jasper cradled against her chest, she made her way to the worn armchair tucked in the corner of the shop, sinking into its familiar embrace. Jasper settled in her lap, kneading her thighs gently as Sage began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are we going to do, Jas? You should have seen the plans he had. All glass and steel, not a hint of character anywhere." She stroked Jasper's fur absently, finding comfort in the rhythmic motion. "He talks about progress like it's the only thing that matters. But what about the soul of this place? What about Mrs. Hendrick's flower shop? Or old Mr. Grayson's boat tours? Where do they fit in his grand vision?" Jasper purred louder, as if encouraging her to continue. Sage leaned back in the chair, her gaze drifting to the window where she could see a sliver of the harbor. "I know things can't stay exactly the same forever, but there has to be a way to move forward without losing everything that makes Bellsleigh special." She thought back to the town hall meeting, to the way some of her neighbors had nodded along with Derek's presentation. "Maybe I'm being selfish," she mused, scratching behind Jasper's ears. "Maybe some people want the change he's offering. But at what cost?" The cat blinked up at her slowly, his steady gaze somehow reassuring. Sage managed a small smile. "You're right, Jas. We can't just roll over and accept this. Bellsleigh Harbor is worth fighting for." With renewed determination, Sage gently shifted Jasper to the side and stood up. She moved to the counter, pulling out a fresh notebook and a pen. "First things first, we need to rally the troops. I bet Margot at the bookshop will have some ideas. And we should talk to the Fishermen's Association. They won't be happy about a fancy new marina pushing them out." As she jotted down names and ideas, Sage felt her spirits lifting. The task ahead was daunting, but she wasn't alone. Bellsleigh Harbor had weathered storms before, both literal and figurative. They would face this one together. Jasper hopped onto the counter, purring as he rubbed his head against Sage's hand. She paused in her writing to give him an affectionate scratch. "Thanks for listening, buddy. I don't know what I'd do without you." The cat meowed in response, then turned his attention to the window. Sage followed his gaze and saw Derek Hartley walking past the shop, his earlier confidence somewhat diminished. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass, and Sage felt a jolt of something. Annoyance, certainly, but also a flicker of curiosity. She quickly looked away, focusing back on her notes. "Don't worry, Jas," she murmured, more to herself than to the cat. "We're not going down without a fight. Bellsleigh Harbor's charm isn't for sale, no matter how dazzling the offer. Business and bouquets." Sage arranged a display of coastal-inspired scarves in the front window of Seaside Chic, her movements quick and agitated as she replayed the town meeting in her mind. The soft fabrics slipped through her fingers, blues and greens reminiscent of the ocean just beyond the shop's doors. But today, even the soothing colors couldn't calm the storm brewing inside her. The bell above the door chimed, a sound that usually brought a smile to Sage's face, but as she turned, her expression froze. Derek Hartley was entering the boutique, his polished appearance contrasting sharply with the shop's laid-back coastal vibe. His crisp suit and perfectly coiffed hair seemed almost comically out of place among the breezy sundresses and handmade jewelry. Jasper, who had been lounging on a high shelf, sat up and watched Derek warily, his tail twitching back and forth like a metronome keeping time with the tension in the room. The cat's green eyes narrowed as if he sensed Sage's discomfort. Sage's posture stiffened as she greeted Derek with forced politeness. "Mr. Hartley," she said, her voice as cool as the sea breeze, "what brings you to Seaside Chic?" Derek's eyes swept across the shop, taking in every detail. "Ms. Winslow," he replied, his tone professional but with an undercurrent of something Sage couldn't quite place. "I'm touring local businesses to assess potential impacts of the development. I thought it would be enlightening to see what Bellsleigh Harbor has to offer." As he spoke, Derek ran a finger along a rack of sundresses, his expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The delicate fabrics seemed to shrink away from his touch, as if even they could sense the threat he represented. "Well, as you can see," Sage said, gesturing around the shop, "we offer a unique blend of coastal fashion and local artistry, something you won't find in any corporate chain store." Derek nodded absently, his gaze lingering on a display of hand-painted seashells. "Quaint," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, louder, he added, "You know, Ms. Winslow, small-town businesses like this need to adapt or die in today's market. It's just the way things are." Sage's eyes narrowed, and she bit back a sharp retort. The urge to defend her shop, her town, and everything she held dear was almost overwhelming. But before she could speak, there was a sudden clatter from above. Jasper, whether by accident or design, had knocked over a small display of seashell necklaces. The delicate pieces tumbled to the floor, scattering across the polished wood. Sage hurried to clean up, grateful for the momentary reprieve from Derek's presence. As she knelt to gather the necklaces, she could feel Derek's eyes on her. The silence in the shop was heavy, broken only by the soft clink of shells as Sage collected them. "Quite the helper you have there," Derek commented dryly, glancing up at Jasper, who had resumed his perch and was watching the proceedings with feline indifference. Sage stood, cradling the necklaces in her hands. "Jasper's part of what makes this place special," she said, her voice firm. "He's as much a fixture here as any of our products." Derek's eyebrow quirked slightly, but he didn't comment further on the cat. Instead, he continued his assessment, moving through the shop with the air of a man conducting an inspection. "Tell me, Ms. Winslow, how long have you been in business here?" 5 years, Sage replied, pride evident in her voice despite her wariness. "And we've seen steady growth each year." Derek nodded, his expression unreadable. "And your customer base? Primarily locals, or do you get much tourist traffic?" Sage hesitated, uncomfortable with the pointed nature of his questions. "We have a loyal local following, but summer tourists make up a significant portion of our sales." "I see," Derek mused, picking up a piece of driftwood art and turning it over in his hands. "And how do you think your business would fare with, say, a more consistent year-round customer base? Perhaps a wealthier demographic?" The implication behind his words was clear, and Sage felt a flare of anger. "Mr. Hartley," she began, her tone carefully controlled, "Bellsleigh Harbor's charm lies in its authenticity. Our seasonal rhythms, our connection to the sea and the land, that's what draws people here. It's not something that can be manufactured or improved upon by luxury condos and high-end boutiques." Derek set down the driftwood piece and turned to face Sage fully. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Was it uncertainty? But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by his usual confident demeanor. "Progress is inevitable, Ms. Winslow," he said, his voice softer than before. "The question is whether you'll be part of shaping that progress or left behind by it." The shop's door chimed again, the sound cutting through the tension between Sage and Derek. Mayor Alowen Bright bustled in, her face lighting up at the sight of the two together. She clapped her hands excitedly, her eyes twinkling with an enthusiasm that made both Sage and Derek instinctively take a step back. "Oh, how wonderful!" Mayor Bright exclaimed, her voice ringing through the shop. Just the two people I was hoping to see. Sage and Derek exchanged a wary glance, their momentary unity in the face of the mayor's exuberance a stark contrast to their earlier antagonism. Mayor Bright, Derek began, his professional mask slipping back into place. What can we do for you? The mayor's smile widened, if that was even possible. I've had the most brilliant idea, she announced, looking between Sage and Derek as if she'd just solved all of Bellsleigh Harbor's problems in one fell swoop. Sage's eyes widened in dismay as she caught the matchmaking glint in the mayor's eye. She knew that look all too well. It usually preceded one of Elowen's well-intentioned but often misguided schemes. I think, Mayor Bright continued, oblivious to the growing discomfort of her audience, that Sage, you should show Derek around town. The silence that followed was deafening. Sage's mouth fell open in shock, while Derek's carefully neutral expression cracked, revealing a flash of genuine surprise. And was that a hint of curiosity? Mayor Bright? Sage started, her voice strained. I don't think that's necessary. Mr. Hartley is perfectly capable of... But the mayor steamrolled over Sage's objections with cheerful determination. Nonsense, dear! Who better to show Derek the heart and soul of Bellsleigh Harbor than our very own Sage? You embody everything that makes our town special. Derek, who had been watching this exchange with a mixture of amusement and resignation, finally spoke up. While I appreciate the offer, Mayor, I assure you I can conduct my own research. Oh, but this isn't just research, Derek. Mayor Bright interrupted, her tone suggesting she was imparting great wisdom. This is about understanding. Sage can help you see Bellsleigh's traditions, its rhythm, its very essence. She paused, a knowing twinkle in her eye. Who knows? You might even find some common ground. The mayor's exaggerated wink was not lost on either Sage or Derek, who both shifted uncomfortably. Jasper, sensing the tension, leaped down from his perch and positioned himself protectively between Sage and the others, his tail swishing back and forth. Mayor Bright, Sage tried again, desperation creeping into her voice. I really don't think... It's settled then, the mayor declared, clapping her hands together once more. Derek, I'm sure you can spare a few hours from your busy schedule for a proper tour, can't you? Trapped by social convention and the mayor's relentless enthusiasm, Derek found himself nodding reluctantly. I suppose I could rearrange some things, he conceded, his gaze flicking to Sage. Sage, for her part, looked like she'd rather face a hurricane than spend an afternoon with Derek Hartley. But years of small-town politeness warred with her desire to refuse, and she found herself mumbling a grudging agreement. Wonderful! Mayor Bright beamed, practically glowing with satisfaction. I'll leave you two to work out the details. Oh, this is going to be marvelous for Bellsleigh Harbor, I just know it. With a final triumphant smile, the mayor swept out of the shop, leaving Sage and Derek standing awkwardly among the coastal-themed displays. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft swish of Jasper's tail against the hardwood floor. Derek cleared his throat, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture that, for the first time, betrayed a hint of discomfort. Well, he said, his usual confidence noticeably subdued, I suppose we should make the best of this situation. Sage sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as the fight drained out of her. She looked around her beloved shop at the pieces of Bellsleigh Harbor's soul that she had carefully curated over the years. When she met Derek's gaze again, there was a fierce determination in her eyes. Fine, she said, her voice steady. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. I'll show you the real Bellsleigh Harbor, Mr. Hartley. Not just the parts you can put a price tag on. Derek's eyebrows rose slightly at her tone, but he nodded. I look forward to it, Ms. Winslow. Perhaps we can start with... But Sage held up a hand, cutting him off. Not so fast. If we're doing this, we're doing it on my terms. Meet me here tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. Wear comfortable shoes and clothes you don't mind getting a little dirty. Derek opened his mouth as if to protest, then thought better of it. He nodded again, a hint of intrigue crossing his features. Very well. 8. a.m. it is. As Derek turned to leave, Sage called out, "And Mr. Hartley, leave the suit at home. You won't be needing it where we're going." The bell chimed as Derek exited, leaving Sage alone with Jasper in the suddenly quiet shop. She looked down at the cat, who was staring up at her with what she could have sworn was a mixture of concern and amusement. "What have I gotten myself into, Jasper?" she murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. Jasper merely purred in response, but Sage could almost hear his unspoken advice. Show him what really matters. With a determined nod, Sage began to plan their tour. She would show Derek Hartley every nook and cranny of Bellsleigh Harbor, every tradition and quirk that made it special. And maybe, just maybe, she could make him see why this town was worth preserving, just as it was. As she jotted down ideas, a small part of her wondered if she might learn something too. But she quickly pushed that thought aside. Tomorrow was about saving Bellsleigh Harbor, nothing more. At least, that's what she told herself as she prepared for what promised to be a very interesting day. A sure thing. The crisp morning air nipped at Sage and Derek's faces as they stood at the harbor front. Sage's chestnut hair danced in the salty breeze while she gestured animatedly towards the lighthouse, its weathered white exterior standing tall against the backdrop of a steel gray sky. "This lighthouse has been guiding ships safely into our harbor for over a century," Sage explained, her eyes bright with pride. "It's not just a landmark, it's a symbol of our town's resilience and dedication to preserving our maritime heritage." Derek nodded absently, his gaze fixed on his expensive watch. The impatience was clear in the set of his jaw and the tapping of his foot. He'd swapped his usual tailored suit for a pair of designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, his idea of comfortable clothes. As they strolled along the boardwalk, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore provided a soothing counterpoint to Sage's enthusiastic narration. "Every Christmas we have the most spectacular boat parade right here," she said, sweeping her arm across the expanse of water. "The whole harbor lights up with decorated boats. It's magical, really. Families come from all over to see it." Derek's brow furrowed as he listened, his mind clearly elsewhere. He was mentally overlaying the quaint harbor with sleek modern structures, calculating potential profits and envisioning a complete transformation of the waterfront. "And how many visitors does this parade bring in?" he asked, his tone more suited to a boardroom than a casual walk. Sage's smile faltered slightly. "It's not about the numbers, Mr. Hartley. It's about community, tradition, creating memories." They made their way to the town's central square, where a flurry of activity greeted them. Local artisans were busy setting up booths for the upcoming Christmas market, their handmade crafts already on display. The air was filled with the scent of pine and the sound of cheerful chatter as vendors arranged their wares. "This is where the real magic happens," Sage said, her enthusiasm returning full force. "Our Christmas market is famous throughout the region. Everything you see here is locally made or sourced." Derek's skepticism was palpable as he surveyed the scene. "It's quaint," he said, clearly struggling to find a diplomatic word. "But how can operations this small possibly sustain themselves? In today's economy, you need scale to survive." Sage whirled to face him, her green eyes flashing with passion. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Hartley. These aren't just operations, they're people's livelihoods, their dreams. By supporting local businesses, we keep money in the community, preserve traditional skills, and maintain the unique character that makes Bellsleigh Harbor special." Derek held up his hands in a placating gesture, taken aback by her fervor. "I'm just looking at the economic realities, Ms. Winslow. Sentimentality doesn't pay the bills." Their path took them past the area where the ice skating rink was being constructed. Workers were busy assembling the boards and preparing the surface, their breath visible in the cold air. Sage's expression softened as she watched the activity. "I learned to skate right here," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "Every winter, this place becomes the heart of the town. Children laughing, couples holding hands, families making memories." Derek's gaze swept over the space, his mind already reconfiguring it. "It's a significant amount of prime real estate to dedicate to a seasonal activity," he mused. Have you considered a year-round attraction? Something that could generate consistent revenue? Before Sage could respond, a voice called out from nearby. Sage, dear, how lovely to see you. They turned to see Mrs. Abernathy, the owner of the local bakery, approaching with a warm smile. The elderly woman's face was lined with laugh wrinkles, and she moved with the slight stoop of someone who'd spent decades bent over a kitchen counter. Mrs. Abernathy, how are you? Sage greeted her with genuine affection. Is everything ready for the market? Oh, yes, dear. My gingerbread is all set to go, Mrs. Abernathy replied before turning her gaze to Derek. And who's this young man? Sage's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. This is Derek Hartley. He's visiting from the city. The change in Mrs. Abernathy's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her smile cooled, and her eyes narrowed slightly as she regarded Derek. I see, she said, her tone notably less warm. Well, I do hope you enjoy your visit, Mr. Hartley. Bellsleigh Harbor is a very special place. Derek shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the scrutiny. He was used to being welcomed in boardrooms and upscale restaurants, not viewed with suspicion by small-town shopkeepers. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Abernathy, he managed, forcing a smile. As they continued their walk, leaving Mrs. Abernathy behind, Derek found his gaze lingering on the buildings they passed. Despite himself, he began to notice details he'd overlooked before, the intricate gingerbread trim on the Victorian-style houses, the way the morning light played off the colorful awnings of the shops, the carefully tended window boxes still bright with winter blooms. More than that, he couldn't help but observe the genuine warmth in the interactions between the townspeople. A young man helping an elderly neighbor with her groceries, a group of children laughing as they raced past on their way to school, shopkeepers calling out greetings to each other as they opened for the day. Sage, attuned to the subtle changes in Derek's expression, watched him out of the corner of her eye. She saw the slight softening around his eyes, the way his shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. But when he caught her looking, Derek quickly schooled his features back into a mask of professional detachment. Shall we continue? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I believe you mentioned something about the town hall? Sage nodded, hiding a small smile. Of course, Mr. Hartley, right this way. As they walked on, the sounds of the awakening town surrounded them, the distant toll of the church bell, the clatter of a delivery truck, the aroma of fresh-baked bread wafting from a nearby cafe. And though neither of them would admit it, both Sage and Derek felt a subtle shift in the air between them, a hint of something neither had anticipated when this tour began. As Sage and Derek approached the small park nestled in the heart of Bellsleigh Harbor, the ancient wishing well came into view. Its weathered stone structure stood as a testament to the town's rich history, moss creeping up its sides and a patina of age giving it an almost mystical appearance. Sage's pace quickened as they neared the well, her eyes lighting up with an enthusiasm that was impossible to miss. This, she announced, gesturing toward the structure with a sweep of her arm, is one of Bellsleigh Harbor's most treasured landmarks. Derek raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident but tempered by a growing curiosity. He had to admit, if only to himself, that Sage's passion for her town was intriguing. The wishing well has been here for over 200 years, Sage continued, her voice taking on a reverent tone. Legend has it that any wish made here during the Christmas season is destined to come true. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to dance on the crisp winter air. Of course, there's a catch. The wish has to be for someone else, not for yourself. Derek found himself leaning in, drawn in by the story despite his usual pragmatism. That's actually quite interesting, he admitted, surprising both Sage and himself with his genuine curiosity. Do you know how the tradition started? Was there a particular event that sparked it? Sage blinked, momentarily taken aback by Derek's sudden interest. She hadn't expected him to engage with the town's lore so readily. Well, she began, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. The story goes that back in 1823, there was a terrible drought. As Sage recounted the tale of a young girl's selfless wish that supposedly brought rain to the parched town, Derek found himself captivated. He watched the way Sage's eyes sparkled as she spoke, her hands moving animatedly to illustrate key points of the story. For a moment, he could almost see Bellsleigh Harbor as she did, not just as a collection of buildings and businesses, but as a living, breathing community with a rich tapestry of shared experiences. Their walk eventually brought them back to Seaside Chic. The tension between them had eased somewhat during their tour, but an undercurrent of disagreement still simmered beneath the surface. As they stepped into the shop, the familiar scent of lavender and sea salt greeted them, a stark contrast to the crisp winter air outside. Derek paused just inside the doorway, his gaze sweeping over the carefully curated displays of coastal-inspired clothing and accessories. He cleared his throat, his tone more considerate than it had been at the start of their tour, but still unmistakably focused on his vision of progress. "I appreciate you taking the time to show me around, Ms. Winslow," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I can see that Bellsleigh Harbor has a unique charm and a strong sense of community. However, I still believe that some modernization could benefit the town without sacrificing its essential character." Sage listened, her expression a complex mix of hope and wariness. She wanted to believe that Derek had been genuinely moved by what he'd seen, but years of protecting her beloved town from outside interests had taught her to be cautious. "I'm glad you've seen some of what makes Bellsleigh special," she replied, her voice measured. "But I'm not sure you fully understand how interconnected everything is here. Change one part, and you risk unraveling the whole fabric of our community." Derek stepped further into the shop, his brow furrowing as he formulated his response. "But surely you can see the potential for growth. With some careful planning, we could increase tourism, create new jobs." "At what cost?" Sage interjected, her earlier warmth giving way to frustration. "Our traditions? Our way of life? The very things that make people want to visit in the first place?" As their discussion grew more heated, neither noticed Jasper, who had been watching the exchange with feline interest from his perch on a nearby shelf. Perhaps sensing the rising tension, or simply deciding it was time for some mischief, the cat chose that moment to make his move. With graceful agility, Jasper leapt onto a display table laden with neatly folded scarves. His sudden appearance startled both Sage and Derek, who turned just in time to see the cascade of colorful fabric tumbling to the floor. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Sage and Derek stared at the scattered merchandise, then at each other, and finally at Jasper, who sat amid the chaos with an expression of perfect innocence. And then, almost in unison, they began to laugh. The tension that had been building between them dissolved in an instant, replaced by a shared moment of unexpected mirth. Sage's laughter was bright and genuine, while Derek's started as a surprised chuckle before growing into a full-bodied laugh that he seemed almost shocked to hear coming from himself. "Oh, Jasper," Sage managed between giggles, shaking her head at the unrepentant cat. "You do have perfect timing, don't you?" Derek, still chuckling, bent down to start gathering the fallen scarves. "I suppose this is his way of contributing to the discussion," he quipped, surprising himself with the ease of the joke. Sage joined him on the floor, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked to restore order to the display. "He does tend to make his opinions known," she replied, a smile still playing on her lips, though usually with less dramatic flair. As they worked side by side, both Sage and Derek felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere between them. The laughter had cleared the air, creating a momentary truce in their ongoing debate about the town's future. Derek found himself noticing the soft texture of the scarves, the intricate patterns woven into some of them. "These are quite beautiful," he commented, holding up a particularly striking blue and silver piece. "Are they all locally made?" Sage nodded, pleased by his observation. "Most of them, yes. We have some incredibly talented artisans in Bellsleigh Harbor. That one, for instance, was made by Mrs. Abernathy's granddaughter. She's only 17, but she has a real gift." As they continued to tidy up, their conversation drifted to lighter topics. The upcoming holiday festivities, the best places to get hot chocolate in town, even a bit about their respective backgrounds. The earlier tension hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had been tempered by this unexpected moment of shared laughter and cooperation. Finally, with the last scarf neatly folded and returned to its place, Sage and Derek stood, surveying their handiwork. Jasper, seemingly satisfied with the chaos he had caused, had retreated to his favorite cushion by the window, where he now dozed contentedly in a patch of sunlight. Tides of change. As Sage finished tidying up the fallen scarves, she glanced out the window of Seaside Chic and noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The previously cheerful sky had turned ominous, mirroring the tension that still simmered beneath the surface of her interaction with Derek. "Looks like we're in for some nasty weather," Derek commented, following her gaze. Sage nodded, a frown creasing her brow. "These storms can get pretty intense. I'd better secure the outdoor displays." Without waiting for a response, she hurried outside, the wind already picking up and whipping her hair around her face. Derek hesitated for a moment before following her, unsure of his place, but feeling compelled to help. Together, they worked quickly to bring in the more delicate items and secure the sturdier displays. The air crackled with electricity, both from the approaching storm and the unspoken tension between them. As they finished, the first fat raindrops began to fall. "You should head back to your hotel," Sage advised, her voice raised to be heard over the increasing wind. "It's not safe to be out in this." Derek nodded, looking conflicted. "What about you?" "I'll be fine. I've weathered plenty of storms here," Sage replied, a touch of pride in her voice. As Derek reluctantly departed, the storm hit Bellsleigh Harbor with full force. Rain lashed against the windows of Seaside Chic, and strong winds battered the waterfront. Sage watched anxiously from inside her shop, worrying about potential damage to the town she loved so dearly. Outside, the storm raged on. Trees bent under the force of the wind, and loose debris skittered along the streets. The usually picturesque harbor now looked wild and dangerous, waves crashing against the shore with frightening intensity. Just as Sage was considering closing up shop early, she spotted a familiar figure through the rain-streaked window. Derek had returned, this time wearing a raincoat and looking determined. She watched, surprised, as he began speaking with a group of locals who had gathered near the harbor. Curiosity got the better of her, and Sage grabbed her own raincoat before venturing outside. As she approached, she could hear Derek's voice rising above the howling wind. "We need to secure the boats and clear any loose debris that could cause damage," he was saying, gesturing towards the harbor. "Let's form teams and work systematically. Safety first, everyone." Sage was taken aback by this display of leadership. It was a side of Derek she hadn't seen before, and it didn't fit neatly into the image of the heartless developer she had constructed in her mind. As the impromptu teams began to form and move out, Sage made a quick decision. She hurried back to Seaside Chic and began gathering blankets, towels, and anything else that might be useful. She put on a pot of coffee and filled several thermoses with hot chocolate. Laden with supplies, Sage made her way back to the harbor. She set up a makeshift station under the awning of a nearby building, offering warm drinks and dry blankets to those helping with the cleanup efforts. As she handed out steaming cups of coffee, Sage found herself working alongside Derek. Their usual animosity seemed to have been washed away by the rain, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. "Here," she said, passing him a towel. "You look like you could use this." Derek accepted it gratefully, using it to wipe the rain from his face. "Thanks," he replied, a hint of surprise in his voice. "This is really great, what you're doing here." Sage shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's what we do in Bellsleigh Harbor. We take care of each other." As the storm began to subside, they moved their efforts to the boardwalk, clearing away debris that had been tossed about by the wind. Without speaking, Sage and Derek fell into an efficient rhythm, passing planks and tools back and forth as they worked to restore order to the battered waterfront. In this moment of unexpected teamwork, Sage found herself studying Derek more closely. His suit was long gone, replaced by rain-soaked work clothes. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and there was a smudge of dirt on his cheek. yet there was something in his determined expression, in the way he worked tirelessly alongside the townspeople, that gave Sage pause. For his part, Derek was seeing Sage in a new light as well. Her fierce protectiveness of the town, which he had initially seen as mere stubbornness, now revealed itself as a deep love for her community. He watched as she effortlessly coordinated with her neighbors, offering encouragement here, a helping hand there. As they worked side by side, neither spoke of their ongoing disagreement about the future of Bellsleigh Harbor. Instead, they focused on the task at hand, finding an unspoken understanding in their shared effort to help the town recover from the storm. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds when Mayor Aloan approached them, looking tired but relieved. "You two have done an amazing job," she said, looking between Sage and Derek with a hint of surprise in her eyes. "I think we've got things under control now. Why don't you both head home and get some rest?" Sage and Derek exchanged a glance, both suddenly aware of how long they had been working together without conflict. There was a moment of awkwardness as the reality of their usual positions reasserted itself. "I should get back to the shop," Sage said, breaking the silence. "Make sure everything's okay there." Derek nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. "And I should check on the other areas of town, see if there's any more help needed." As they parted ways, both felt a lingering sense of confusion. The storm had revealed new facets of each other that didn't fit neatly into their preconceived notions. Sage found herself wondering if there was more to Derek than the cold, profit-driven developer she had assumed him to be. And Derek, for his part, was beginning to understand the deep connections that bound Bellsleigh Harbor together, connections that went far beyond mere tradition or quaintness. As the clouds parted and weak sunlight filtered through, Mayor Aloan surveyed the scene with a mix of relief and concern. She knew the town had weathered worse, but the timing couldn't have been more inconvenient with the holiday season fast approaching. With a determined set to her jaw, Mayor Aloan made a few quick calls. Within the hour, a town-wide text alert went out, calling for an emergency meeting at the town hall to assess the damage and plan repairs. Meanwhile, back at Seaside Chic, Sage was busy mopping up puddles of water that had seeped in under the door. She was so focused on her task that she didn't notice Jasper, who had been restlessly pacing near the entrance, slip out as soon as she cracked the door open to sweep out some debris. The curious feline padded down the wet sidewalk, his whiskers twitching at the sense of salt and rain in the air. As he rounded the corner, he spotted Derek's car, its door left ajar as the developer hurriedly gathered some papers from the front seat. Without hesitation, Jasper leapt into the vehicle, curling up on the plush back seat, hidden from view. Derek, oblivious to his new passenger, slid into the driver's seat and headed towards the town hall. The drive was short, and as he pulled into a parking spot, his mind was already racing with ideas and concerns about the storm's impact on his development plans. He stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, and was immediately startled by a gray blur that shot past his legs. "What the?" he exclaimed, stumbling backward as Jasper darted across the parking lot. Several bystanders, also on their way to the meeting, let out surprised yelps as the cat weaved between their legs. Derek watched in bewilderment as Jasper made a beeline for the town hall steps, disappearing inside through a propped-open door. Feeling responsible for the chaos, Derek hurried after the cat, his polished shoes splashing through puddles as he gave chase. Inside the town hall, he found Jasper had taken refuge under a chair in the corner of the meeting room. Derek crouched down, trying to coax the cat out with soft words and awkward hand gestures. It was this scene that greeted Sage as she arrived, slightly out of breath from her brisk walk. She stopped short in the doorway, taking in the sight of the usually composed Derek Hartley on his hands and knees, his suit rumpled and damp, speaking in a gentle voice to her recalcitrant cat. "Jasper," Sage said, her voice a mix of surprise and amusement. "What are you doing here, you naughty thing?" At the sound of her voice, Jasper's ears perked up, but he remained firmly under the chair. Derek looked up at Sage, a sheepish grin on his face. "I think he might have stowed away in my car," he explained. "I didn't realize until he bolted out in the parking lot." Sage couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of the situation. Here they were, in the aftermath of a storm, with serious matters to discuss, and her cat had managed to create a comical diversion. She moved to help Derek, kneeling beside him. "Come on, Jasper," she coaxed, holding out her hand. "You've had quite an adventure, haven't you?" Slowly, Jasper emerged from his hiding spot, allowing Sage to scoop him up. The tension in the room, which had been palpable as worried townspeople filed in, seemed to dissipate slightly at the sight of the mischievous cat. Mayor Elowen, who had watched the scene unfold with barely concealed amusement, cleared her throat. "Well, now that our feline friend has been corralled, shall we begin?" As the meeting got underway, Sage found a seat near the back. Jasper curled contentedly in her lap. She listened as various town officials reported on the damage. A few downed power lines, some flooding in low-lying areas, and minor damage to the boardwalk and several storefronts. When it came time to discuss repairs, Sage expected Derek to push for modern, efficient solutions that might clash with the town's aesthetic. To her surprise, he stood up and began outlining ideas that skillfully blended contemporary techniques with traditional designs. "We could reinforce the boardwalk with a more durable composite material," Derek suggested, "but overlay it with reclaimed wood to maintain its classic appearance. For the storefronts, we can use impact-resistant glass in the windows, but frame them with locally sourced, traditional moldings." As Derek continued, Sage found herself nodding along, impressed by his thoughtful approach. She caught his eye at one point, offering a small smile of approval, which he returned with a look of quiet gratitude. The meeting concluded with a clear action plan and a sense of community spirit that seemed to have been reinforced by the shared experience of the storm. As people began to file out, Sage approached Derek, Jasper still cradled in her arms. "That was unexpected," she said, her tone warm. "Your ideas for the repairs, I mean. They were really good." Derek ran a hand through his hair, looking both pleased and slightly embarrassed. "Thanks. I've been doing a lot of thinking since I got here, about how to balance progress with preservation." They walked out together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the damp streets. By unspoken agreement, they headed towards Seaside Chic, both feeling the need to check on the shop after the storm. As they entered, Sage set Jasper down, and he immediately trotted over to his favorite cushion, settling in as if he'd never left. Sage and Derek stood in the middle of the shop, suddenly aware of how bedraggled they both looked, clothes still damp and hair mussed from the day's events. "I should probably head back to the inn," Derek said, but made no move to leave. Sage hesitated, then said, "Why don't you stay for a bit? I think we both could use a warm drink after all this." As she busied herself with making tea, Derek wandered the shop, taking in the cozy atmosphere that seemed even more pronounced in the aftermath of the storm. The warm glow of the shop's lights cast a gentle radiance over the displays, creating an inviting ambiance. "You know," Derek said quietly, accepting the steaming mug Sage offered him, "I never wanted to be the bad guy, in any of these towns." Sage leaned against the counter, studying him. "What do you mean?" Derek sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Every time I come to a place like Bellsleigh Harbor, I'm immediately cast as the villain, the outsider who wants to destroy everything unique about the town. But that's never been my intention. I see potential, you know? Ways to make things better, more sustainable." As he spoke, Sage found herself seeing Derek in a new light. The vulnerability in his voice, the earnestness in his eyes, it all painted a picture of a man who was far more complex than she had initially assumed. "I think I'm starting to understand," Sage said softly. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "And for what it's worth, I think Bellsleigh Harbor is starting to see that too." They shared a smile, the warmth of the moment accentuated by Jasper's contented purring from his nearby perch. As they stood there, surrounded by the charming displays of Seaside Chic and the fading light of day, Sage realized that her view of Derek, and perhaps of the future of Bellsleigh Harbor, was beginning to shift in ways she hadn't anticipated. Shop talk and sweet nothings. Sage sat at her desk in Seaside Chic, a deep frown etched across her face as she pored over a stack of bills and financial reports. The shop was quiet, with only a few customers browsing the racks of coastal-inspired clothing and accessories. Sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the vibrant colors of the boutique, but it did little to brighten Sage's mood. As she crunched numbers, the bell above the door chimed softly. Derek stepped inside, his eyes immediately drawn to Sage's worried expression. He hesitated for a moment, acutely aware of the fragile truce they had formed in the wake of the storm. Taking a deep breath, he approached her desk. "Everything okay?" Derek asked, his voice gentle. Sage looked up, startled out of her concentration. She instinctively moved to cover the papers, but then sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Not really," she admitted reluctantly. Derek's brow furrowed with concern. "Anything I can help with?" Sage chewed her lower lip, weighing her options. Finally, she decided to open up. "It's the shop," she explained, gesturing to the papers. "Sales have been declining steadily over the past few months. I'm worried about keeping Seaside Chic afloat." Derek listened attentively, his business mind already whirring with potential solutions. He pulled up a nearby chair and sat down, leaning in to examine the reports Sage had spread out on her desk. "Have you considered creating an online presence for the shop?" Derek suggested after a moment of contemplation. Sage's reaction was immediate and defensive. "Absolutely not," she said, shaking her head emphatically. "The whole point of Seaside Chic is the personal touch. The experience of browsing, touching the fabrics, chatting with me about styling options. You can't get that online." Derek held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your concerns, but hear me out. An online presence doesn't have to replace the in-store experience. It can complement it." As they debated, neither noticed Jasper padding silently across the floor. The cat weaved between Derek's legs, surprising both of them. Derek, without thinking, reached down to scratch behind Jasper's ears. The cat responded with a loud, approving purr. Sage couldn't help but smile at the sight. "Well, it looks like Jasper's warming up to you," she remarked, her tone softening slightly. Derek chuckled, continuing to pet the cat as he spoke. "Look, I'm not suggesting you turn Seaside Chic into an impersonal online megastore, but think about it this way. An e-commerce site could help you reach customers who can't make it to Bellsleigh Harbor regularly. It could showcase your unique items and drive more foot traffic to the physical store." Sage listened, her skepticism evident but mixed with growing interest. "But how would that work without losing the personal touch that makes Seaside Chic special?" "There are ways," Derek assured her. "You could offer virtual styling sessions, create behind-the-scenes content that showcases your process for selecting items, even do live streams from the shop. It's about extending your personality and the shop's charm beyond these four walls." Sage leaned back in her chair, absently twirling a pen between her fingers as she considered Derek's words. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I'm just afraid of losing that connection with my customers. It's not just about selling clothes and accessories. It's about being part of the community, you know?" Derek nodded, his expression softening. "I get it, believe me. I've struggled with maintaining personal relationships in my own business dealings. It's easy to get caught up in numbers and projections and forget about the human element." This admission caught Sage off guard. She studied Derek's face, seeing a vulnerability there that she hadn't noticed before. "Really? I would have thought that came naturally to you." Derek shook his head, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "Not at all. In fact, that's part of why I've been rethinking my approach here in Bellsleigh Harbor. I've realized how much I've been missing by not connecting with the communities I work in." Sage felt a shift in her perception of Derek. The image of him as a cold, calculating businessman was slowly giving way to a more complex picture. "So, how do you balance it?" she asked, genuinely curious. "The business side with the personal?" Derek leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "That's the beauty of it. When done right, they can actually enhance each other. For Seaside Chic, an online presence could allow you to share your passion and expertise with a wider audience. You could tell the stories behind your products, showcase local artisans, even highlight Bellsleigh Harbor itself." As Derek spoke, Sage found herself imagining the possibilities. She could picture herself hosting virtual trunk shows, giving online tours of new collections, maybe even starting a blog about coastal fashion and lifestyle. I suppose it could be a way to spread the Bellsleigh Harbor charm, she mused, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. Derek nodded encouragingly. Exactly. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. We could start small, maybe with just a simple website and social media presence. See how it goes and adjust from there. Sage and Derek moved to her computer, nestled in a cozy corner of Seaside Chic. The screen's glow illuminated their faces as Derek pulled up several websites, each showcasing boutiques that had successfully blended their unique charm with an online presence. Look at this one, Derek said, pointing to a site with a clean, coastal-inspired design. They've managed to capture the essence of their in-store experience through high-quality photos and detailed product descriptions. Sage leaned in closer, her eyes widening as she took in the site's features. Oh, I love how they've included a virtual tour of their shop, she exclaimed, her earlier skepticism giving way to curiosity. As Derek scrolled through more examples, Sage's mind began to race with possibilities. She could envision Seaside Chic's online storefront, complete with images of her carefully curated collections and perhaps even short videos showcasing her styling tips. We could do a section on local artisans, Sage suggested, her excitement building. Maybe feature a different artist each month, telling their story and how their work fits into the Bellsleigh Harbor aesthetic. Derek nodded enthusiastically. That's a great idea. It would really emphasize the community aspect of your shop. As they continued to brainstorm, both Sage and Derek became increasingly aware of their physical proximity. Their shoulders touched as they leaned in to examine the screen, and the air between them seemed to crackle with a newfound tension. Sage could feel the warmth radiating from Derek's arm, and she found herself oddly distracted by the scent of his cologne, a subtle, woodsy fragrance that reminded her of the nearby forest. Derek, for his part, was acutely conscious of Sage's presence beside him. He couldn't help but notice the way her eyes lit up as she talked about her ideas, or the way her hair caught the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the shop windows. He found himself stumbling over his words more than usual, his usual businesslike demeanor giving way to something more flustered and uncertain. Their brainstorming session was suddenly interrupted by a loud thump. Jasper had leapt onto the desk, his tail swishing mischievously as he knocked over a cupful of pens and pencils. The writing implements clattered across the desk, rolling towards the edge. "Oh no!" Sage exclaimed, reaching out instinctively to catch the falling pens. At the same moment, Derek's hand shot out with the same intention. Their fingers brushed against each other, sending an unexpected jolt of electricity through both of them. They pulled back quickly, as if burned, their eyes meeting in a moment of startled recognition. Sage felt a blush creeping up her cheeks, and she quickly busied herself with gathering up the scattered pens. Derek cleared his throat awkwardly, running a hand through his hair as he tried to regain his composure. "Sorry about that," Sage mumbled, shooting a reproachful look at Jasper, who seemed entirely unrepentant as he settled himself comfortably on the desk. "No worries," Derek replied, his voice a touch higher than normal. "Cats will be cats, right?" They shared a nervous laugh, the tension between them palpable. Just as they were about to return their attention to the computer, the bell above the shop door chimed cheerfully. Mayor Elowen bustled in, her face beaming as she took in the scene before her. "Well, well, well," the mayor said, her eyes twinkling with barely concealed delight. "What do we have here? It's wonderful to see you two working together so closely." Sage felt her blush deepen, and she noticed that Derek's ears had turned a distinct shade of pink. "We're just discussing some ideas for an online presence for Seaside Chic," she explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, is that what they're calling it these days?" Mayor Elowen said with a knowing smile. "Well, I must say, this partnership seems to be off to a splendid start. I can't wait to see what you two come up with. For the website, of course." Derek cleared his throat again, looking anywhere but at Sage or the mayor. "Yes, well, we're still in the early stages of planning," he said, his usual confident tone now tinged with embarrassment. Mayor Elowen's smile widened. "Oh, I'm sure you'll figure it out together. You make quite the team, if I do say so myself." She winked at Sage, who wished fervently that the floor would open up and swallow her whole. After a few more pointed comments about collaboration and synergy, the mayor finally took her leave, the bell tinkling merrily as she exited the shop. In her wake, she left a silence that was thick with unspoken words and barely concealed emotions. Sage and Derek looked at each other, the awkwardness of the moment hanging between them. Then, almost simultaneously, they burst into laughter. The tension that had been building dissipated somewhat, replaced by a shared sense of amusement at the mayor's not-so-subtle matchmaking attempts. "Well," Sage said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes, "I guess we're not being as subtle as we thought." Derek chuckled, shaking his head. "Apparently not, though I'm not sure subtlety is in Mayor Elowen's vocabulary." As their laughter subsided, they found themselves looking at each other with new eyes. The attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface was now impossible to ignore, acknowledged in the wake of the mayor's pointed observations. "So," Derek said, his voice softer than before, "should we get back to work on this website idea?" Sage nodded, feeling a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. "Definitely. I think we're on to something good here." They turned back to the computer, both secretly thrilled at the prospect of spending more time together. As they resumed their brainstorming, their chairs seemed to inch closer together, their hands occasionally brushing as they pointed out different features on the screen. Jasper, still perched on the desk, watched them with what could only be described as a feline smirk, as if he too was in on the secret that was blooming between Sage and Derek. Love on the rocks. Derek sat in his temporary office at Harbor Haven Inn and Cottages, his brow furrowed as he stared at the laptop screen before him. The faces of his investors peered back at him through the video call, their expressions a mix of impatience and irritation. "Hartley, we're not in the business of preserving quaint little towns," barked Marcus, the lead investor. "We're here to make money. The original plan is solid. Push it through." Derek ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. "I understand that, Marcus, but we need community buy-in. If we can work with the town, we might—" "Enough with the touchy-feely nonsense," interrupted another investor, her voice sharp. "We didn't hire you to make friends. Get it done, or we'll find someone who will." The call ended abruptly, leaving Derek staring at his own reflection in the darkened screen. He pushed back from the desk and began to pace the room, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. His gaze fell on a small seashell perched on the windowsill, a gift from Sage during their tour of Bellsleigh Harbor. He picked it up, running his thumb over its smooth surface as he remembered her passionate defense of the town's traditions. With a heavy sigh, Derek set the shell down and grabbed his jacket. He knew what he had to do, even if the thought of it made his stomach churn. The bell above Seaside Chic's door chimed softly as Derek entered. Sage looked up from arranging a display of colorful scarves, her initial smile fading as she took in his troubled expression. "Derek, what's wrong?" she asked, setting down the scarf in her hands. He approached the counter, his steps hesitant. "Sage, we need to talk. I just got off a call with my investors and, well, things aren't looking good." Sage's brow furrowed as she listened to Derek explain the pressure he was under. Her expression shifted from confusion to disappointment and finally settled into anger as the full implications of his words sank in. "So that's it?" she snapped, her voice rising. "All your talk about understanding the town, about finding a compromise, it was just lip service?" Derek winced at her tone. "It's not that simple, Sage. I have obligations, responsibilities." "To who?" Sage cut him off, her eyes flashing. "To a bunch of suits who've never even set foot in Bellsleigh Harbor? What about your responsibility to the people who actually live here?" By now, the few customers browsing the shop had stopped pretending not to listen, openly watching the confrontation unfold. Derek was acutely aware of their stares as he tried to explain himself. "I'm trying to find a middle ground here," he said, his voice strained. "But I can't just ignore my investors. They have a say in this, too." Sage let out a bitter laugh. "A say? They have the only say that matters to you, the almighty dollar. I can't believe I actually thought you were different." Derek felt a flare of anger at her words. That's not fair, Sage. You know I've been trying to understand this town, to find a way to make this work for everyone. Really? Sage countered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're ready to bulldoze right over us the moment your investors snap their fingers. Their voices echoed through the shop, growing louder with each exchange. Behind a nearby clothing rack, Jasper's ears flattened against his head as he retreated further into his hiding spot. You're oversimplifying things, Derek argued, frustration evident in his tone. This isn't just about profits, it's about progress, about bringing new opportunities to Bellsleigh Harbor. Sage's eyes narrowed. Opportunities? Like pricing out local businesses? Turning our home into just another cookie-cutter tourist trap? That's not what I want, Derek insisted, running a hand through his hair in exasperation. But we can't just pretend the world isn't changing. Small towns like this need to adapt to survive. Adapt, not surrender their soul, Sage shot back. She shook her head, disappointment etched across her features. I really thought you were starting to understand what makes this place special. I guess I was wrong. Derek felt a pang in his chest at her words. Sage, please. I'm trying to find a solution here. If we could just... No. Sage cut him off, her voice firm. I think you've made your position clear, Mr. Hartley. Now, if you don't mind, I have a business to run, at least for as long as your progress allows it to exist. The use of his last name stung more than Derek cared to admit. He opened his mouth to argue further, but the look in Sage's eyes, a mixture of anger and hurt, made the words die in his throat. The bell above the door chimed once more, this time heralding the arrival of Mayor Elowin. Her usual cheerful demeanor faded as she took in the tense atmosphere of the shop. Derek and Sage stood facing each other, both flushed with anger and frustration, while the handful of customers huddled awkwardly by the displays, pretending to browse. What in the world is going on here? Mayor Elowin asked, her voice cutting through the thick silence that had fallen after Sage's last biting remark. Sage turned to the mayor, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Ask Mr. Hartley, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He's just made it clear where his priorities lie. Derek felt a twinge of guilt at the hurt in Sage's voice, but he steeled himself. He had a job to do, after all. Mayor, I was just explaining to Sage that the investors... I don't want to hear it, Sage interrupted, holding up a hand. She took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose herself. Derek, I think it's best if you leave now. Derek hesitated, torn between his desire to explain himself further and the growing realization that he might have irreparably damaged something precious. Sage, please, if we could just talk this through... Mayor Elowin stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Derek's arm. I think it might be best if you gave Sage some space right now, Derek, she said softly, her eyes conveying both sympathy and firmness. Derek looked from the mayor to Sage, who had turned away from him, her shoulders rigid with tension. He knew he should say something, anything to fix this, but the words wouldn't come. With a heavy sigh, he nodded and moved towards the door. As he reached for the handle, Derek couldn't help but look back. The sight that greeted him made his heart clench. Sage had slumped against the counter, her face buried in her hands. Mayor Elowin was already moving to comfort her, but not before shooting Derek a look that was equal parts understanding and reproach. The bell chimed one last time as Derek stepped out into the crisp air of Bellsleigh Harbor. The cheerful sound felt like a mockery of the heavy atmosphere he'd left behind in Seaside Chic. Inside the shop, Sage allowed Mayor Elowin to guide her to her favorite chair, a plush armchair tucked away in a quiet corner. As she sank into its familiar comfort, Sage felt the fight drain out of her, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. There, dear, Mayor Elowin soothed, patting Sage's shoulder. Why don't you tell me what happened? Before Sage could respond, a soft meow caught their attention. Jasper, sensing that the coast was clear, had emerged from his hiding spot behind a rack of summer dresses. With graceful leaps, he made his way to Sage, jumping into her lap and curling up with a contented purr. Sage's hands automatically began to stroke Jasper's soft fur, finding comfort in the familiar routine. As she petted the cat, the tears she'd been holding back began to fall silently down her cheeks. "Oh, Sage," Mayor Aloan said softly, pulling up another chair to sit beside her. "I was so stupid," Sage whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I actually thought he was different, that he understood what this town means to us." Mayor Elowen listened patiently as Sage recounted the argument, her tears falling faster as she spoke of Derek's investors and their demands. The mayor's brow furrowed with concern, but she remained silent, allowing Sage to vent her frustrations. "It's not just about the shop," Sage continued, her fingers buried in Jasper's fur. "It's about everything Bellsleigh Harbor stands for. Our traditions, our community. How can he not see how special that is?" Mayor Elowen sighed, her usual optimism tempered by the gravity of the situation. "Change is never easy, dear, and sometimes people surprise us, for better or worse." Sage nodded glumly, scratching behind Jasper's ears. The cat's loud purrs filled the silence that had fallen between them. "What am I going to do?" Sage asked finally, looking up at the mayor with red-rimmed eyes. "I can't just stand by and watch our town be torn apart." Mayor Elowen leaned forward, taking one of Sage's hands in her own. "We'll figure something out, dear. Bellsleigh Harbor has faced challenges before, and we've always come through stronger for it." As the mayor spoke, her eyes drifted to the window where she could see Derek's retreating figure making its way down the street. His shoulders were slumped, his steps lacking their usual confident stride. For a moment, Mayor Elowen felt a pang of sympathy for the man caught between two worlds. Turning back to Sage, she squeezed her hand reassuringly. "For now, why don't we close up the shop early? I think you could use a nice cup of tea and some time to clear your head." Sage nodded gratefully, the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "That sounds perfect, actually. Thank you, Mayor." As Mayor Elowen bustled about, gently ushering out the remaining customers and flipping the open sign to closed, Sage remained in her chair, lost in thought. Jasper kneaded her lap contentedly, oblivious to the turmoil of emotions swirling within his human. Sage's mind raced with possibilities and fears. What would become of Seaside Chic if Derek's plans went through? How would the town she loved change? And why did the thought of losing Derek's friendship hurt almost as much as the threat to her business? As if sensing her distress, Jasper looked up at her with his big green eyes, letting out a soft meow. Sage couldn't help but smile, scratching under his chin. "At least I've still got you on my side, huh, Jasper?" she murmured. The cat's only response was to purr louder, a comforting rumble against Sage's chest. For now, it was enough to anchor her in the midst of the storm brewing around Bellsleigh Harbor. A change of heart. Derek paced the floor of his room at Harbor Haven Inn and Cottages, his usually polished appearance disheveled from a sleepless night. Crumpled papers and architectural sketches littered every surface, testament to hours of furious brainstorming and discarded ideas. His laptop screen glowed in the dim light, multiple tabs open to research on sustainable development and community-focused projects. As he moved, Derek's foot caught on a wadded-up sketch, sending it skittering across the hardwood floor. He bent to retrieve it, smoothing out the paper with a sigh. The plans that had seemed so perfect in his office now felt hollow and soulless compared to the vibrant life of Bellsleigh Harbor. "There has to be a way," he muttered, tossing the paper onto an overflowing wastebasket. His eyes fell on the seashell Sage had given him during their tour of the town, perched on his nightstand. Its pearlescent surface caught the first hints of dawn creeping through the curtains. Something clicked in Derek's mind. He grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began to sketch rapidly, his pencil flying across the page. As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the harbor, Derek's new vision for the waterfront took shape. Gone were the sleek, modern structures that had dominated his original plans. In their place, he drew cozy cottages with gabled roofs, their facades echoing the charm of Bellsleigh's existing architecture. He incorporated green spaces and community gardens, designed to host the town's beloved festivals and gatherings. The centerpiece of his new design was a reimagined pier with kiosks for local artisans and a stage for performances. Derek could almost hear the laughter and music that would fill the space, bringing new life to the waterfront without sacrificing its soul. As dawn broke fully, Derek put the finishing touches on his proposal. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his bleary eyes. Despite his exhaustion, a sense of excitement thrummed through him. This was it, a plan that could bridge the gap between progress and tradition. His gaze drifted once more to the seashell on his nightstand. A small smile tugged at his lips as he thought of Sage. Would she see the effort he'd put into understanding her beloved town? Could this be the olive branch they needed? There was only one way to find out. Derek gathered his sketches and notes, tucking them carefully into his portfolio. He splashed some water on his face and changed into a fresh shirt, trying to make himself presentable despite his lack of sleep. With a deep breath, he headed out the door, his steps purposeful as he made his way towards Seaside Chic. The town was just beginning to stir as Derek walked down the quiet streets. Early risers nodded politely as they passed, some offering tentative smiles. It seemed word of his clash with Sage hadn't spread too far yet. As he approached Seaside Chic, Derek's pace slowed. Through the window, he could see Sage moving about the shop, preparing for the day ahead. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and even from a distance, Derek could see the tension in her shoulders. For a moment, he hesitated. What if she refused to hear him out? What if his efforts were too little, too late? The seashell in his pocket seemed to grow heavier, a reminder of the connection they'd started to form. Derek squared his shoulders and pushed open the door, the cheerful jingle of bells announcing his arrival. Sage looked up at the sound, her expression immediately guarded as she recognized Derek. Jasper, who had been lounging on the counter, sat up straight, his green eyes fixed intently on the newcomer. The cat's tail twitched back and forth, as if unsure whether to welcome or warn off this potential intruder. "Sage," Derek began, his voice rough from lack of sleep. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but I was hoping we could talk." Sage's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't immediately throw him out. That had to be a good sign, right? "I'm not sure there's anything left to say, Derek," she replied, her tone cool but not outright hostile. Derek took a step forward, his portfolio clutched tightly to his chest like a shield. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "For yesterday, for not listening, for a lot of things, really." Surprise flickered across Sage's face, quickly masked by skepticism. "An apology?" "Yes," Derek nodded. "And, if you're willing, I'd like a chance to explain some new ideas I've been working on. Ideas that I hope, might change your mind about the development." Sage's eyebrows rose, curiosity warring with caution in her expression. She glanced down at Jasper, who had relaxed slightly but still watched Derek with wary interest. After a moment that felt like an eternity to Derek, Sage let out a small sigh. "All right," she said, gesturing to a small table near the window. "I suppose I can give you 5 minutes." Relief washed over Derek as he moved to the table, carefully laying out his sketches. "Thank you," he said earnestly. "I promise. This isn't just some corporate trick. I spent all night working on this, trying to find a way to honor what makes Bellsleigh Harbor special while still bringing in the improvements the town needs." As Derek spread out his sketches on the small table, Sage leaned in, her curiosity piqued despite her lingering reservations. The morning light streaming through the shop window illuminated the pages, revealing intricate designs that were a far cry from the sleek, modern structures she had feared. "I started with the pier," Derek explained, his finger tracing the lines of a reimagined waterfront. "Instead of a standard commercial space, I've designed it as a community hub. These kiosks here," he pointed to a series of small, charming structures, "could showcase local artisans and small businesses." Sage's eyes widened as she took in the details. The kiosks bore a striking resemblance to the quaint shops that lined Bellsleigh's main street, complete with gabled roofs and weathered wood facades. "That's, Not what I was expecting, she admitted, her voice softer than before. Derek nodded, encouraged by her response. I realized that the heart of Bellsleigh isn't in modern amenities but in its traditions and community spirit, so I've tried to incorporate that throughout the design. As he continued to explain, pointing out green spaces for festivals and a central stage for performances, Sage found herself leaning in closer, her earlier hostility melting away. She began to ask questions, her tone shifting from skeptical to genuinely interested. What about the old lighthouse? She inquired, tapping a spot on the map. It's been a landmark for generations. Derek's face lit up. I'm glad you asked, he said, flipping to another sketch. I thought we could restore it, make it the centerpiece of a historical walking tour. We could even work with the local historical society to create educational programs. Sage's expression softened further, impressed by the thoughtfulness of Derek's revisions. She found herself offering suggestions, pointing out areas where local traditions could be further incorporated. The summer solstice festival always takes place near the harbor, she explained. If we expanded this area here, it would be perfect for the bonfire and dancing. As they worked together, the earlier tension between them dissolved into a collaborative energy. Derek quickly jotted down Sage's ideas, his pencil flying across the paper as they bounced thoughts back and forth. Their voices overlapped, excitement building as they refined the plans. Unnoticed by either of them, Jasper had been watching the exchange with feline curiosity. The cat, usually wary of strangers, seemed intrigued by the change in Sage's demeanor. Slowly, he rose from his perch on the counter and padded silently across the shop floor. Derek was in the middle of explaining a proposed renovation for the Harbor Haven Inn when he felt something brush against his leg. He glanced down, surprised to see Jasper rubbing against his ankle, a soft purr rumbling from the cat's throat. Well, hello there, Derek said, his voice gentle as he carefully bent down to pet Jasper. The cat arched into his touch, purring louder. Sage watched the interaction with astonishment. I can't believe it, she murmured. Jasper usually takes weeks to warm up to anyone new. Derek straightened, a small smile playing on his lips. I'll take that as a good sign, he said, his eyes meeting Sage's. In that moment, something shifted between them. Sage saw not the corporate developer she had first judged Derek to be, but a man who had listened, learned, and genuinely tried to understand her beloved town. Derek, in turn, saw the passion and love for community that drove Sage's initial resistance, recognizing it now as a strength rather than an obstacle. They held each other's gaze for a beat longer than necessary, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they both turned back to the plans on the table. So, Sage said, her voice carrying a new warmth, tell me more about your ideas for the community gardens. Derek nodded, leaning in to point out the relevant section of his sketch. As he did, Sage moved closer, their shoulders brushing. Neither pulled away from the contact. I thought we could incorporate some of the local flora, Derek explained, his finger tracing the outline of the proposed gardens. Maybe work with the school to create an educational program about native plants. Sage nodded enthusiastically. That's brilliant. And we could tie it into the Harvest Festival in the fall. Maybe even start a farmer's market. As they continued to refine the plans, their earlier animosity seemed a distant memory. They stood close together, heads bent over the sketches, occasionally glancing at each other with growing appreciation and respect. The air between them hummed with a new energy, a mixture of shared purpose and rekindled attraction. Jasper, seemingly satisfied with the turn of events, settled himself comfortably between their feet. The cat's contented purr provided a soothing backdrop to their animated discussion, a symbol of the trust being rebuilt between Sage and Derek. The morning light grew stronger, casting a warm glow over the scene in Seaside Chic. Outside, Bellsleigh Harbor was coming to life, its residents unaware of the transformative conversation taking place within the small boutique. As Sage and Derek continued to work, their collaborative efforts promised a future that honored the town's past while embracing thoughtful progress. Seaside Serenade. The bell above the door of Seaside Chic chimed merrily as Sage unlocked it, welcoming the crisp morning air into the boutique. She hummed a cheery holiday tune, her mood as bright as the twinkling lights adorning the shop's windows. With deft hands, she arranged a new display of holiday-themed coastal wear, positioning a whimsical starfish-adorned Santa hat atop a mannequin wearing a cozy blue sweater. The shop had undergone subtle changes in recent weeks, blending Derek's suggested modernizations seamlessly with its original coastal charm. A sleek digital kiosk stood unobtrusively in one corner, allowing customers to browse an expanded online inventory, while handcrafted driftwood shelves still held an array of locally made jewelry and accessories. As if summoned by her thoughts, the bell chimed again, and Derek stepped through the door, 2 steaming cups of coffee from the local cafe in hand. His face broke into a warm smile as he caught sight of Sage. "Morning," he called out, carefully navigating around a display of colorful beach totes. "Thought you might need a pick-me-up." Sage's eyes lit up at the sight of the coffee. "You're a lifesaver," she said, accepting the cup gratefully. "I was up late last night brainstorming ideas for the holiday window display." They settled into a comfortable silence, sipping their coffee and surveying the shop. The earlier tension that had marked their interactions had dissolved, replaced by an easy camaraderie that neither had anticipated but both welcomed. "So," Derek began, leaning against the counter, "I've been going over the revised development plans. The Historical Society is thrilled about the lighthouse restoration project." Sage nodded enthusiastically. "I heard. Mrs. Pendleton couldn't stop talking about it at the grocery store yesterday. I think she's already planning guided tours." Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by light-hearted banter and shared laughter. As they discussed the progress of various aspects of the plan, Jasper sauntered into view, stretching lazily before hopping onto the newly designed window display. The cat settled in, contentedly watching the early morning passers-by. Derek, mid-sentence about the proposed community gardens, absent-mindedly reached out to scratch Jasper's ears. The cat leaned into his touch, purring loudly, a far cry from his initial wariness of the developer. "You know," Sage said, a teasing lilt in her voice, "I think Jasper might like you more than me these days." Derek chuckled. "What can I say? I have a way with cats and stubborn boutique owners." Sage rolled her eyes good-naturedly, about to retort when the bell above the door chimed once more. Mayor Elowen bustled in, her cheeks rosy from the cool morning air. "Good morning, you two," she exclaimed, her eyes twinkling as she took in the scene before her, Sage and Derek standing close together, coffee cups in hand, and Jasper purring under Derek's touch. "Don't you both look cozy?" Sage felt a blush creeping up her neck, but managed to keep her voice steady. "Good morning, Mayor. What brings you by so early?" "Oh, just making my rounds," Elowen replied airily, though her knowing smile suggested otherwise. "Actually, I wanted to chat with you both about the upcoming Christmas festival. The planning committee could really use your input. As a team, of course." Derek and Sage exchanged amused glances at the mayor's not-so-subtle matchmaking attempt. "We'd be happy to help, Mayor," Derek said, his lips twitching with suppressed laughter. "Sage here has been full of great ideas lately." "Wonderful!" Elowen clapped her hands together. "I'll have my assistant send over the details. Now, I'll leave you two to your coffee." With a wink that was about as subtle as a foghorn, the mayor swept out of the shop. As the door closed behind her, Sage and Derek burst into laughter. "Well," Sage said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes, "I guess we're on festival duty." Derek nodded, still chuckling. "Seems that way. Though I have to admit, I'm looking forward to it." Their laughter subsided, leaving them in a charged silence. Sage found herself acutely aware of how close they were standing, the warmth of Derek's presence a stark contrast to the cool morning air. Derek's eyes met hers, and for a moment neither spoke, the air between them thick with unspoken words and growing attraction. Derek cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Hey, I had an idea. Why don't we take a walk along the harbor? We could discuss some ideas for incorporating the festival into the development plans." "Plus," he added with a grin, It might be safer to talk outside, away from any eavesdropping mayors." Sage laughed, grateful for the suggestion that both acknowledged and diffused the tension. "That sounds perfect," she agreed, a hint of excitement coloring her voice. "Let me just grab my coat." As Sage moved to the back of the shop, Derek turned to Jasper, who was watching the proceedings with feline interest. "Wish me luck, buddy," he murmured, giving the cat a final scratch behind the ears. Jasper meowed softly, as if in encouragement, before curling up for a nap in the warm patch of sunlight streaming through the window. Sage returned, shrugging on a cozy blue pea coat that matched her eyes. "Ready?" she asked, her cheeks still flushed from their earlier laughter. As Sage and Derek stepped onto the seaside boardwalk, the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Bellsleigh Harbor. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries mingling with the distant lapping of waves against the shore. Sage took a deep breath, her eyes sparkling as she gazed out over the familiar scenery. "You know," she began, her voice soft with nostalgia, "I used to come here every day after school. My grandmother would meet me at that bench over there." She pointed to a weathered wooden seat facing the water. Derek followed her gesture, imagining a younger Sage swinging her legs as she sat beside her grandmother. "That sounds nice," he said, his tone encouraging her to continue. "It was," Sage agreed, a wistful smile playing on her lips. She'd bring these incredible homemade cookies, sea glass cookies she called them. They were sugar cookies dyed in different shades of blue and green, with a sprinkle of coarse sugar on top to make them sparkle. As they walked, Sage continued to point out spots that held special memories. The ice cream shop where she'd had her first summer job, the dock where she learned to sail, the small cove where she and her friends would hunt for seashells. With each story, Derek found himself seeing Bellsleigh Harbor anew, understanding the depth of Sage's connection to this place. They paused at a quaint gazebo overlooking the water. "This is where we hold the annual Christmas Carol sing-along," Sage explained, her eyes alight with enthusiasm. "The whole town gathers here on Christmas Eve. It's magical, all those voices joining together, the harbor lit up with holiday lights." Derek listened intently, struck by the warmth in Sage's voice. He'd seen many small towns in his career, but he'd never quite understood their appeal until now. Through Sage's eyes, he was beginning to see the true value of community and tradition. As they approached the lighthouse, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. The lighthouse stood tall and proud, its white exterior now bathed in the warm glow of the fading daylight. Without thinking, Derek reached out and took Sage's hand. She glanced at him, surprise flickering across her face, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled around his, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the play of light on the water. The waves sparkled like diamonds, reflecting the brilliant colors of the sunset. In that moment, both Sage and Derek felt a sense of peace and possibility that neither had expected when they first met. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, they turned to make their way back to Seaside Chic. Their hands remained linked, swinging gently between them as they walked. "So," Derek began, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking about ways to incorporate more of the town's character into the development plans." Sage looked at him curiously. "Oh, what did you have in mind?" "Well, for starters, I was thinking we could use local artisans for a lot of the decorative elements. Maybe commission some of those sea glass mosaics you mentioned for the new community center?" Sage's eyes lit up. "That would be amazing! Mrs. Henderson would be thrilled. She's been looking for a big project to showcase her work." As they walked, they continued to exchange ideas, their visions for the town's future meshing in ways neither had anticipated. Derek suggested ways to modernize without losing charm, while Sage offered insights into preserving the town's unique character. "You know," Sage said thoughtfully, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually excited about these changes now. It feels like we're building on what makes Bellsleigh special, not erasing it." Derek squeezed her hand gently. "That's the goal. I want this place to thrive, not just change for the sake of change. Before they knew it, they were standing in front of Seaside Chic. The shop's windows glowed warmly, Jasper visible as a cozy silhouette curled up on a display. They turned to face each other, still holding hands. Derek leaned in slightly, his eyes searching Sage's face. For a moment, it seemed as though he might kiss her. Sage's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing. But then, gently, she pulled back. "Derek," she said softly, I think we should take things slow. This is all so new, and there's still so much at stake with the development." Derek nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course," he said, his voice warm. "We've got time." They stood there for a moment longer, neither quite ready to end the evening. Finally, Sage said, "I should probably head in. Early day tomorrow." "Right," Derek agreed. "I'll see you tomorrow. Maybe we can go over those community center plans?" Sage smiled. "I'd like that." As Derek turned to leave, Sage watched him go, a mixture of hope and nervousness swirling in her chest. She waited until he had turned the corner before unlocking the shop door and stepping inside. The familiar scent of Seaside Chic enveloped her, a blend of sea salt, lavender, and the faint mustiness of old books. As she moved through the darkened shop, her eyes fell on a dark shape draped over one of the chairs. Drawing closer, she realized it was Derek's jacket, forgotten in their earlier rush to leave. And there, curled up contentedly on top of it, was Jasper. The cat blinked up at her lazily, looking entirely at home on the unexpected bed. Sage couldn't help but smile, seeing it as a sign of the cat's and her own growing trust in Derek. She reached out to scratch Jasper behind the ears, her mind full of the evening's events and the possibilities that lay ahead. Sealed with a kiss. As the holiday season descended upon Bellsleigh Harbor, Seaside Chic transformed into a festive wonderland. Twinkling lights draped across the windows, casting a warm glow onto the sidewalk outside. Coastal-themed ornaments hung from driftwood branches, creating a unique blend of Christmas cheer and seaside charm. Sage stood at the entrance, her fingers gently adjusting a wreath made of seashells and sun-bleached driftwood. She stepped back, admiring her handiwork with a satisfied nod. Through the shop window, the town square bustled with activity. Colorful stalls were being set up, their awnings flapping in the crisp winter breeze. The annual Christmas festival was kicking off, and excitement hummed in the air. Sage watched the scene unfold, her eyes bright with anticipation, yet tinged with a hint of nostalgia. This festival had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember, and now, with the changes coming to Bellsleigh Harbor, it felt even more precious. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Sage from her reverie. Derek stepped inside, his arms laden with rolled-up plans and a small, shimmering gift bag. As soon as he saw Sage, his face broke into a warm smile, mirroring the one that spread across her own features. "Looks like I came just in time for the big reveal," Derek said, nodding towards the plans he carried. Sage's eyes lit up. "The final approved version?" Derek nodded, his excitement palpable. Together, they moved to the counter, clearing a space amidst the holiday merchandise. With careful hands, they unrolled the plans, smoothing out the corners. Sage leaned in, her finger tracing along the detailed drawings. Her eyes darted from one section to another, taking in the carefully preserved elements of Bellsleigh Harbor's charm. The lighthouse stood proud and untouched, while the new boardwalk seamlessly blended with the existing structures. Even Seaside Chic was there, nestled among the other local businesses, its facade refreshed, but its character intact. "It's perfect," Sage breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at Derek, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and relief. "You really listened to everyone's concerns." Derek's expression softened. "Well, I had a pretty good guide to show me what really matters around here." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the bustling world outside faded away. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, Derek reached for the gift bag he had brought. I got you something," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. to commemorate the project and everything else." Sage accepted the bag, curiosity piqued. She reached inside and carefully pulled out a snow globe. As she held it up to the light, her breath caught in her throat. Inside the glass sphere was a miniature version of Bellsleigh Harbor, every detail lovingly crafted. There was the lighthouse, standing tall and proud, and there, right in the center, was Seaside Chic, its tiny windows glowing with warmth. Sage's eyes glistened with emotion as she gazed at the thoughtful gift. "Derek, it's beautiful," she managed, her voice thick with feeling. Derek watched her, his own eyes soft with affection. "I wanted you to always have a piece of Bellsleigh Harbor, no matter what changes come." Sage carefully placed the snow globe on a shelf near the register, where the light from the holiday decorations caught the glitter inside, making it sparkle like freshly fallen snow. As they stood admiring the gift, a familiar patting of paws drew their attention. Jasper, ever curious, had emerged from his cozy nook to investigate the new object. He approached the shelf, stretching up on his hind legs to sniff at the snow globe. Sage and Derek watched, amused as Jasper's whiskers twitched with interest. Suddenly, the cat's paw darted out, batting at the globe and sending it spinning on its base. "Jasper!" Sage exclaimed, torn between laughter and concern. Derek quickly steadied the snow globe, chuckling as Jasper looked up at them with innocent eyes. "I guess he approves," he said, scratching the cat behind the ears. The tension that had been building between them dissolved into laughter, the sound mingling with the distant carols drifting in from the square. As their mirth subsided, Sage and Derek found themselves standing close, the warmth of the moment enveloping them. Outside, the first flurries of snow began to fall, dusting the cobblestone streets with a fine layer of white. The Christmas festival was in full swing now, the square alive with lights and music. Inside Seaside Chic, surrounded by twinkling lights and the scent of cinnamon, Sage and Derek stood at the precipice of something new, something as yet unnamed but full of promise. Jasper, seemingly satisfied with his inspection of the snow globe, curled up on the counter next to the plans, his tail wrapping around his paws. He blinked slowly at Sage and Derek, as if giving his feline blessing to whatever might unfold. Derek gently took Sage's hand, drawing her attention back to him. His usual confidence seemed to falter, replaced by an endearing nervousness that softened his features. He cleared his throat, his eyes flickering between Sage's face and their intertwined fingers. "Sage, he began, his voice low and earnest. "When I first came to Bellsleigh Harbor, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. I had a plan, a vision for progress that I was sure would benefit everyone. But you showed me that there's more to a town than just its potential for development." Sage listened intently, her emotions playing across her face in a dance of surprise, joy, and a hint of lingering caution. She squeezed Derek's hand encouragingly, silently urging him to continue. Derek took a deep breath, drawing strength from her touch. "You opened my eyes to the beauty of tradition, the importance of community, and somewhere along the way, between our arguments and our compromises, I found myself falling for you." The admission hung in the air, soft yet powerful. Sage's eyes widened, a blush creeping across her cheeks. Derek pressed on, his words gaining momentum. "I love the way your eyes light up when you talk about this town, how fiercely you protect what matters to you. I love your creativity, your kindness, even your stubbornness." He chuckled softly. "I never expected to find someone who could challenge me, inspire me, and make me want to be better. But that's exactly what you've done, Sage." As Derek finished speaking, a charged silence filled the shop. The only sounds were the distant carols from the square and the gentle hum of the holiday lights. Sage took a deep breath, her free hand reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. When she spoke, her words were soft but filled with certainty. "Derek, when you first arrived, I was so afraid of what your presence meant for Bellsleigh Harbor, for my shop, for me," Sage began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I thought you were here to change everything I loved about this place, But you've shown me that change doesn't have to mean losing what matters most. She paused, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. You've taught me that progress and tradition can coexist, that there's beauty in finding balance. And in the process, you've become someone I can't imagine my life without. Derek's eyes shone with hope as Sage continued. I love the way you listen, truly listen, even when we disagree. I love your determination, your willingness to adapt and grow. You've become a part of Bellsleigh Harbor, a part of my world, in a way I never expected, but now can't imagine being without. Their eyes met, a world of unspoken emotions passing between them. Derek slowly leaned in, his gaze flickering to Sage's lips. This time, Sage didn't pull away. Their lips met in a tender, heartfelt kiss, the culmination of their journey from adversaries to partners. The kiss was soft and sweet, filled with the promise of new beginnings. It was a perfect blend of the passion that had fueled their initial debates and the understanding that had grown between them. As they parted, both were smiling, their foreheads resting against each other. A contented meow broke the moment, causing them to look down. Jasper had silently padded over and was now curled up at their feet, his green eyes gazing up at them with what could only be described as feline approval. The cat's presence added a touch of whimsy to the scene, a reminder of the journey they had all taken together. Sage laughed softly, the sound filled with joy and a hint of wonder at how perfectly everything had fallen into place. She bent down to scratch Jasper behind the ears, her other hand still entwined with Derek's. I think someone approves, Derek said, his voice warm with amusement. Well, Jasper has always been an excellent judge of character, Sage replied, straightening up to meet Derek's gaze once more. The scene before them was a perfect picture of newfound harmony. Sage and Derek stood hand in hand, their faces glowing with happiness, while Jasper sat contentedly at their feet. The warm light of the holiday-decorated shop cast a golden hue over everything, the twinkling lights reflecting in their eyes. Outside, the Christmas festival continued in full swing, the sounds of laughter and music drifting through the windows. But inside Seaside Chic, time seemed to stand still, encapsulating this moment of connection and promise. Derek gently tugged Sage closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. So, what happens now? He asked, his voice a mix of excitement and curiosity. Sage smiled up at him, her arms naturally finding their place around his neck. Now? Now we build something beautiful together. For us, for the shop, for Bellsleigh Harbor? I like the sound of that, Derek murmured, leaning in for another soft kiss. As their lips met again, Jasper let out another approving meow, as if sealing the deal. The cat then sauntered over to the window, settling on his favorite perch to watch the festive activities outside. In that moment, with the glow of holiday lights surrounding them, the sounds of celebration floating in from the square, and Jasper keeping watch, Sage and Derek stood at the threshold of a new chapter. Their story, like Bellsleigh Harbor itself, was a perfect blend of cherished traditions and exciting new possibilities, all wrapped up in the magic of the holiday season. All's fair in love and development. Months had passed since that fateful kiss in Seaside Chic, and the boutique was now a hub of activity on a sunny spring afternoon. The shop had undergone a subtle transformation, blending its original coastal charm with sleek, modern elements. Soft blues and whites still dominated the color scheme, but new, minimalist displays showcased Sage's carefully curated merchandise to perfection. Sage moved confidently among the customers, her demeanor relaxed and happy. She adjusted a stack of soft hand-knit sweaters, then turned to assist a young woman trying on a wide-brimmed sun hat. That color really brings out your eyes, Sage said warmly, her smile genuine. The customer beamed back, clearly pleased with the personalized attention. The bell above the door chimed, and Derek stepped into the shop. He was dressed more casually now, in a light blue button-down and khakis, fitting seamlessly into Bellsleigh Harbor's laid-back vibe. Several regular customers greeted him by name, a testament to how well he'd integrated into the community. "Hey, everyone," Derek called out cheerfully, his eyes scanning the shop until they landed on Sage. Their gazes met, and both smiled, a wordless exchange full of warmth and affection. As Derek made his way through the shop, he passed by the large front window where Jasper lounged in a new, stylish cat bed. The feline barely stirred as Derek reached out to scratch his ears, a far cry from the wary cat who had once knocked over displays at Derek's approach. Now, Jasper simply purred contentedly, his eyes half closed as he basked in the attention. "Looks like someone's living his best life," Derek chuckled, giving Jasper one last pat before making his way to Sage. "He's not the only one," Sage replied, her eyes twinkling as she greeted Derek with a quick peck on the cheek. "Ready to check out those online numbers?" Derek nodded, and they made their way to the back office, a space that had also seen its share of changes. A sleek computer setup now occupied one corner, while the rest of the room maintained its cozy, beachy feel with driftwood accents and seashell decorations. Sage settled into the chair in front of the computer, Derek leaning over her shoulder as she pulled up the website for Seaside Chic's online store. The screen displayed an array of impressive statistics, increased traffic, a spike in sales, and glowing customer reviews. "Would you look at that?" Sage exclaimed, her voice filled with pride and a hint of amazement. "We've doubled our out-of-state orders since last month." Derek grinned, holding up his hand for a high five. "I told you people would love your coastal style all over the country. You just needed to give them a way to find you." Sage returned the high five enthusiastically, her eyes shining. "I can't believe I was so resistant to this at first. You were right. We really can have the best of both worlds." Their celebration was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Mayor Elowin poked her head in, her face wreathed in smiles. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything," she said, though her tone suggested she wouldn't have minded if she had. "Mayor Bright, come on in," Sage welcomed her, standing up from the computer. "We were just going over some exciting numbers for the online store." "Wonderful, wonderful," Elowin beamed, stepping fully into the office. "Actually, I have some exciting numbers of my own to share." She pulled out a folder from her bag, her enthusiasm palpable. "The latest town statistics just came in, and let me tell you, they're better than we could have hoped for." Derek and Sage exchanged curious glances as Elowin spread out several charts on the desk. "Tourism is up 30% from last year," she began, pointing to a graph with a sharp upward trend. "And local businesses have seen an average growth of 15% across the board." "That's incredible," Derek said, leaning in to study the figures more closely. "The waterfront renovation must be paying off." "Oh, it certainly is," Elowin agreed, her eyes twinkling. "Your vision for preserving Bellsleigh's charm while incorporating those subtle modern improvements has been a real game changer. We're attracting a whole new crowd of visitors without losing our regulars." Through the office window, they could see the revitalized waterfront. The old-fashioned lampposts and benches remained, but they were now interspersed with sleek, eco-friendly additions like solar-powered charging stations and interactive historical markers. The harbor bustled with activity, a perfect blend of traditional fishing boats and modern pleasure crafts. "Of course," Elowin continued, her tone taking on a hint of playful pride. "I'd like to think my matchmaking skills played a small part in all this success." She winked at Sage and Derek, not even trying to hide her self-satisfaction. Sage felt her cheeks warm slightly, but she couldn't help smiling. "Well, Mayor, I suppose we do owe you some thanks for encouraging us to work together." "Oh, I'd say it worked out rather well, wouldn't you?" Elowin said, gathering up her charts. "Now, I'll leave you two to your work. Keep up the good job. You're both doing wonders for this town." As the mayor swept out of the office, Sage and Derek shared an amused look. There was no denying that Elowin's meddling had set them on this path, even if they'd taken quite a few detours along the way. Derek moved closer to Sage, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her in. He planted a quick, affectionate kiss on her forehead, and Sage leaned into him, savoring the moment. "You know," Derek said softly, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm really glad I came to Bellsleigh Harbor." Sage looked up at him, her eyes full of warmth. "And I'm really glad you stayed." As Mayor Allewen's enthusiastic footsteps faded down the hallway, Sage and Derek shared an amused look, their eyes twinkling with shared mirth. The mayor's matchmaking efforts had become something of a running joke between them, a reminder of how far they'd come since those first contentious days. Derek pulled Sage close, his arm fitting naturally around her waist. He planted a quick, affectionate kiss on her forehead, and Sage leaned into him, savoring the warmth of his embrace. Their easy affection spoke volumes about their relationship's growth, a stark contrast to the tension that had once simmered between them. "What do you say we get out of here for a bit?" Derek suggested, his voice soft. "It's too nice a day to be cooped up inside." Sage nodded, her smile bright. "I think we've earned a little break, don't you?" They stepped out of Seaside Chic, the bell chiming cheerfully behind them. The spring air was crisp and invigorating, carrying the faint scent of salt and blooming flowers. Derek took Sage's hand as they strolled along the boardwalk, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. As they walked, locals called out greetings, waving from shop doorways or pausing their conversations to chat. It was a far cry from the suspicion Derek had once faced, and he couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. "Derek! Sage!" called out old Tom, the owner of the bait and tackle shop. "How's business?" They stopped to chat, Derek listening intently as Tom shared his latest fishing tales. Sage watched him with a fond smile, remembering how he'd once dismissed these conversations as a waste of time. Now he was fully engaged, laughing at Tom's jokes and offering suggestions for attracting more tourists to the shop. As they continued their walk, they passed by the newly renovated ice cream parlor. The owner, Sarah, waved them over excitedly. "I just got a new shipment of that sea salt caramel you both love," she said with a wink. "Want to be my taste testers?" Derek grinned, looking at Sage. "What do you say? For old time's sake?" Sage laughed, remembering their first awkward ice cream date. "How can we refuse?" They sampled the ice cream, praising Sarah's latest creation. As they left, promising to return soon, Sage squeezed Derek's hand. "Remember when you thought all these little shops were holding the town back?" Derek shook his head, a rueful smile on his face. "I was so wrong. It's these little moments, these connections, that make Bellsleigh Harbor special." They continued their walk, eventually reaching the lighthouse. The once weathered structure now stood proud and gleaming, its fresh paint catching the afternoon sun. It was a testament to their combined vision, a perfect blend of preserving history while embracing necessary updates. As they paused to admire the view, Sage leaned against the railing, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the ocean met the sky. Derek stood beside her, but his attention was elsewhere. His hand kept drifting to his pocket, and there was a nervous energy about him that Sage hadn't seen in months. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Sage said, turning to look at Derek. She caught him hastily removing his hand from his pocket, a flicker of something. Nervousness? Excitement? Crossing his face. "Yeah," Derek agreed, his voice slightly strained. He cleared his throat, drawing Sage's full attention. "Sage, there's something I want to say." Sage turned to face him fully, curiosity and a hint of anticipation in her eyes. "What is it, Derek?" Derek took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "When I first came to Bellsleigh Harbor, I thought I knew exactly what this town needed. I was so sure that my way was the only way forward." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "But you showed me that there's more to progress than just new buildings and increased profits." Sage listened, her heart beginning to race as she sensed the weight behind Derek's words. "You taught me the value of tradition, of community," Derek continued, his voice growing stronger. "You helped me see that the real magic of this place isn't in what can be built or changed, but in the connections between people, in the stories and memories that make up its heart." He reached out, taking both of Sage's hands in his. "Our journey together hasn't always been smooth. We've had our share of arguments and misunderstandings, but through it all, we've grown. Together. You've made me a better person, Sage. You've helped me find a home here, not just in Bellsleigh Harbor, but with you." Realization dawned on Sage's face as Derek slowly lowered himself to one knee. Her breath caught in her throat as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "Sage Winslow," Derek said, his voice filled with love and just a hint of nervous tremor. "You've shown me what it means to truly belong somewhere, to be part of something bigger than myself. I can't imagine my life without you in it." He opened the box, revealing a ring that perfectly captured their journey, a modern, sleek band supporting a vintage-style setting that held a sparkling diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Sage's eyes as she looked at the ring, then back at Derek's hopeful face. In that moment, she saw their entire journey, from adversaries to reluctant partners to friends, and finally to this, a love that had grown stronger with every challenge they'd faced together. "Yes," Sage breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, louder, with a joy that seemed to light up her entire being. "Yes, Derek! Of course I'll marry you!" Derek's face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto Sage's finger. He stood, pulling her into a tight embrace as she laughed and cried at the same time. Their lips met in a kiss that was sweet and tender, full of promise for their future together. As they held each other, the sun began its descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The lighthouse cast a long shadow across the water, a silent sentinel to their happiness. In the distance, back at Seaside Chic, Jasper sat in the shop window, his tail curled neatly around his paws as he gazed out at the town. Though he couldn't see the proposal from his perch, there was a contented look in his feline eyes, as if he somehow knew that all was right in his world. As the newly engaged couple began their walk back along the boardwalk, hand in hand and hearts full of joy, Bellsleigh Harbor seemed to glow in the fading light. The town that had once been at the center of their conflict now stood as a symbol of their love, a perfect blend of honoring the past while embracing the future, just like Sage and Derek themselves.